Welcome to Bold Thinking, entrepreneurial stories honestly told. In a world full of chaos, this is a podcast about the people making positive change in the world, using bold thinking to transform business and themselves. And as we know at the moment, things were a little bit doom and gloom. So we wanted to bring some light into the situation. So today's guest is Anthony Wysome, who's just joined Costa Coffee after a whopping 14 years at Waitrose, where he was head of customer propositions and store development. Absolutely love working with Anthony. I've worked with him for many, many years, and he's become a friend of mine as well. So it's brilliant talking to you today, Anthony, and thanks for making time.
That's all right. I'm fascinated to see how I qualified for your bold thinking. I'm sure you'll draw something out. I just figured our main qualification is that I'm from Wellington and you're from Hadley. So, look, for our Shropshire listeners, I grew up in the shining city on the hill that you aspired to. You know what? That's one of the things. Me and Anthony grew up very, very close to each other and then hit the bright lights of London many years later. So we've got a lot of things in common. So first off, this is a celebration of 2 of the 11 people that ever left Shropshire, isn't it? No, very true. So question first off, tell us about your new role as Global Served Platforms Director at Costa Coffee. That'd be quite an exciting move for you, Anthony. I hope so. Yeah, I mean, I haven't started it yet, so I can't tell you a vast amount, but it's a market which I've always found fascinating without being in. I've consumed a huge amount of coffee over the last 20 years. And actually, probably, if I think of, all the research trips that we've done over all that time, there's certain things that stand out that when you see them, you kind of figure that there's something new there that may just become big. And I remember my first Starbucks, which was, probably Chicago in sort of the late 90s, and going in and just seeing this, at the time, this place that just seemed very, very cool and very, very different from the sort of coffee shops that I'd seen before, full of people who seemed very, very cool. And you just kind of figured that this might be going somewhere. And over the last 20 years, it's gone enormously. And what's interesting about Costa is that they kind of saw the same thing. They, the Whitbread team who were in charge at the time saw that and then acted incredibly quickly, bought the small Costa Coffee chain as it was and have grown it, to 30 countries, obviously huge business in the UK. So I can't wait because, they're now owned by Coca-Cola. They want to get bigger still. They want to go more global. This will be the first role where I'm, I feel, well, I've got a global brief, not just to go and look globally, but to actually influence. And looking forward to getting started. It's
really exciting. So I met Anthony many, many years ago when he was working at Waitrose, even though we did grow up very, very close to each other in the Shropshire. So Anthony, you worked in Waitrose for many years. So how does it feel to move on from Waitrose, your home for so many years? You made a lot of big impacts and changes.
I think it's important. I think it's important to leave a business quite early on in your career, because my first post was I was a graduate at Sainsbury's and did 10 years or so, and partly because I was sort of young and fairly cocky, I kind of figured that Sainsbury's sort of to some degree revolved around me, and you need to leave somewhere to realise quite how quickly you're forgotten. I think, you in the end, there's this sort of weirdness about it, isn't there? You jump onto some particular train and you pour your sort of heart and effort and huge amounts of hours and thought into it. And then at some point you jump off that train and it carries on. And, if you're sitting around waiting for someone to sort of put a blue plaque above your desk, you're probably going to be waiting a while. And so I figured with Waitrose that that 14 years was great, but actually the deal was always that the work had to be amazing, and I was really lucky. So for 10 or 11 years from the start, I just got to do incredibly fun stuff that was important to the business, where you could see the impact you were having, where you enjoyed hugely the company of the people you were working with every day. And I think that, when you're faced with a choice around leaving, as I was, you've got to look at whether you're going to be, if you stay, you're going to have more fun than you did before, or whether you're going to have less. And actually, if you can't answer that categorically, if you think you've had all the really good stuff and some of your best pals have disappeared and the work is perhaps going to be tougher for a period of time, I think you've really got to consider doing something new. Life does get a bit short at that point.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think you were quite brave around that. You took 6 months sabbatical. Was it 6 months you've had? Feels like longer. To those watching endlessly on. But it was the first time I'd ever sort of stepped away from work, and there was an opportunity to do it. To confess to returning to Shropshire's Greenlands to bring up the family, and so we took the view that actually the one thing that we wouldn't concentrate on just in the short term was work. We'd go and do everything else and get the family set up and buy the house and do all the faffing about. So I, it didn't feel that brave at the time, and I think it would have probably got braver if you'd been sort of on the sidelines for a lot longer. But I like to think that people should be able to do these things. I hope that life gets a bit more flexible. I don't think you should. I think there should be more of a sort of a market for people coming in and going out of things as and when they are of use, rather than hanging on in a business for the wrong reasons. Yeah. So, Anthony, tell us about your boldest business idea.
Well, I don't know who else you interviewed on this podcast, Julia, but if it was Richard Branson, then I'm going to disappoint you. I think you've got to remember that I think I've worked in food. Worked in food retail for 25 years, and an awful lot of food retail in that time hasn't changed very much. I can wax lyrical on this subject, but actually, the real sort of hero of supermarkets was a guy called Clarence Saunders, who I used to do a really dull lecture about this, who set up a business called Piggly Wiggly in the US in just over 100 years ago, and he kind of took care of supermarketing. He took it from kind of Arkwright type stores to something which overnight had turnstiles at the beginning and the end. It had shopping baskets. It had self-serve. It had checkouts. He basically half nailed the model 100 years earlier, and an awful lot of supermarket executives have got very wealthy in the intervening 100 years, basically doing the same thing and doing it a lot, and doing it in bigger shops and smaller shops, which is basically the primary innovation that turned up until sort of online kicked in. And so I think one of the sort of interesting things about my time in supermarketing has been actually that the appetite for entrepreneurialism and the appetite for new ideas is generally quite small. It scares people. Most people are there trying quite hard to repeat tomorrow what they did yesterday, perhaps very slightly more efficiently. And someone who arrives in a boardroom, full of new ideas is seen either as some kind of terrorist or as a sort of bit of a sort of vaudeville act who's just allowed in every now and again to sort of tick the innovation box, which they can then quietly reject when the FD takes a closer look at it. And so I think in that context, it's interesting to look back and you look at the genuinely bold ideas you've had and what happened to them, and then you look at what's worked. And for me, look at a couple of different things. I mean, perhaps the one that got away, although it didn't feel like it at the time, was when we set up what became Little Waitrose, which was Waitrose's convenience business, and we did that back in 2008, and we did a great piece of work, great piece of innovation work, and we ended up with 4 concepts. One of those concepts, when you dig it out, I actually found the picture the other day, looks almost exactly like an Amazon Go store, which is about to probably litter the UK in fairly soon, but actually is effectively a store with no people in it. It's, you scan yourself in, you pick up what you want, you scan out, and 50 yards down the road, your phone pings to tell you that you paid for it. And it's genius. And actually, we did that. We had that concept. We tested it on customers. The customers generally hated it because it just sounded foreign and diffident and somewhat lacking in any kind of atmosphere. And so we put it to one side and did a perfectly serviceable and a very nice format, which was differentiated from the market as it was, but not, I think, probably not sufficiently to have taken it to global domination. Which when you look back, you think, well, maybe we should have done the tough one. It probably wasn't viable within the context of the business, but you look back and you think, well, there's a bold idea. Someone else had it. Admittedly, Jeff Bezos probably had a slightly better climate for driving major technical innovation, but actually 10 years later, someone does it brilliantly, and the world takes notice, and you kind of sort of look back and think, oh well, ours was quite nice at the time. I think, if you actually look at ideas that have gone in and made money, and have scaled, there aren't that many in UK retailing where if you actually look at, right through the store, most of it is, the whole chunks of it are broadly the same. The one that I feel quite good about is sushi, which I managed to persuade Waitrose to initially test and then scale quite rapidly. And but actually, how you do that is kind of a little bit for all the wrong reasons. I was persuaded very early on because I'd met the people who were beginning to do it on the continent. I thought I'd seen it work in the US. I loved the theatre of watching people prepare sushi really, really well in store, and it met any bunch of customer needs. Waitrose customers are fairly well travelled. They've got a pretty broad taste palette. They love food. They are generally healthy. They appreciate convenience. So I was pretty sure that a lot of that was going to work. But actually, a lot of that then doesn't really move the dial in a risk-averse business. The things that really move the dial and where you actually, I think, spend a lot of your time being clever is rather than creating opportunity, you have to take the risk away. And I think to get bold, this is probably the real lesson for big businesses is actually quite often it's giving them the opportunity to say there really is no risk here. You can do this, and you can't possibly do worse than you're doing right now. Is almost the argument. And so with sushi, we managed to prove that we'd got some stuff that was performing so badly, some pretty moribund sort of hot chicken counters and things tucked away, where the space was so terrible anyway that you really couldn't go wrong. You paid someone to take over that space, or you asked someone to come and take over that space, and aside from the cost of fitting it out, there was no other thing to do. And so that and the sort of get out plan if it doesn't work, and the fact that actually you didn't have to do anything, you didn't have to train anyone, you didn't have to go out and market it particularly. It was all taken. It was a package. You just made it too hard to say no to. And you're probably selling 40 or 50 million in Waitrose. It was copied by just about everyone. It's in M&S, Asda, Tesco. They've all had a good go. I just thought 80, 100 million market now, very profitable. And yeah, I'm proud of it, not because I think it's the greatest innovation on the planet, but because actually we were able to find a way of pleasing the key decision makers in a business who often are not particularly keen on entrepreneurialism, and they do need that tough financial argument that says that actually, this one's safe, you can give it a whirl, and we'll take it from there.
Well, that's interesting because, what have you learned about customers through that? Because customers actually, do they like change or don't they like change? I mean, businesses inherently are a little bit, adverse to it, averse to risk and averse to innovation. What do customers want?
Customers are customers are hard to view as a collective. I think it's fair to say. I mean, I think, if I have a strength at all, it is in my, I think, the way I appreciate customers. I think there's a lot of people who claim to understand customers. I think that's trite. I think you can interrogate the data, but actually customers are individuals, and I think when you try and group them too much, you can get into trouble. Sushi was interesting, actually. What happened there was we launched it for the first store in Battersea. It was a new store we just opened in where they're building next to the American Embassy, where they're just building skyscraper after skyscraper after skyscraper. And we opened it, and it went off like an absolute train. And actually, we thought, well, it must be all those posh customers. And it wasn't. It was all the Polish builders who absolutely loaded it in. So, but actually, what you found was that the customers, if it's interesting and it's fun and there's a big sort of watch out here. But if it's good and it appeals to certain customers, then you find that they educate each other. So what was quite funny in sort of some of the Heartland stores was that the teenage children of traditional Waitrose customers were excited by the sushi and were then educating their parents on why it was good to eat and actually getting them to enjoy it. And so it was one of those where if it's of a quality and it has a certain customer penchant, you can take it too far. We didn't sell a lot of sushi in Abergavenny, to be perfectly honest, and I'm not sure we're going to sell much in the future. But actually, if it's good and a tranche of customers like it, then they will help expand that market in time. The interesting thing is that if it's not good, or if you've mangled the shop, if you've tortured the shop and moved everything around in a way that customers don't perceive as necessary, then you're for it. There are certain towns in the UK where I wouldn't go back without security, because once you've mangled someone's Waitrose, customers, certainly loyal Waitrose customers, have very long memories and very little forgiveness. I always remember going into Cirencester store on the day that we'd refurbished it, and we had moved an awful lot of stuff around, and a bloke or a guy came up to me who I would have suspected was probably in his late 80s or early 90s, and asked me where we'd moved the biscuits to. I politely walked him very slowly around 2 or 3 aisles and got him to his biscuits and found the right ones, and he just turned to me. He was beautiful sort of suit on and the rest of it. And he just turned to me in his attire and he just said, "I understand exactly why you had to do this." He said, "I just wish you'd waited till I died." And I think that kind of stuck with me whenever we then mangle stores. Because if you just, we used to basically refurbish stores to a sort of generic template, and it was a disaster because there were, to a loyal customer, there is no generic template. There's their shop.
Yeah, it's true. So obviously you've been in the industry for quite a long time now. What have you learned along the way? What's one of the biggest lessons you've sort of learned?
I mean, partly, age kind of weathers you a bit, doesn't it? And if I think about what I could have done, or if I'd learned, for example, to pay greater respect to my superiors at times, then I would have probably been in different positions. But actually, I was brought up to believe that authority had to earn its own respect rather than just be supported unquestioningly. So I think I think you probably learn, certainly over time, you learn that actually, no matter how much you've developed, no matter how much you've learned, you can't completely escape your genetics and your upbringing. I was. I did one of those surveys a few months ago that sort of actually said, well, what should your career be? And I'm the son of a scientist and a musician, and the survey came back and said I should either be a scientist or a musician, which and I think that's, I think you learn self-awareness, you learn probably to accept your strengths, and accept that you're not going to have some other ones, and you learn to listen if you didn't know how to do that in the first place, which I suspect I didn't. And I think you also, if you're smart, you learn to retain a really brutal objectivity that just which I think is critical with customers. I think you have to be open-minded to everything and curious, and it disappoints me when I find that people have kind of switched off that bit of their brain. But you have to be brutally objective, and I think this is a good time for that. I for example, I led a lot of flexible working over the last few years. I insisted that everyone in my team was able to work flexibly because it was all there to be done, and it helped everyone, and it gave them a better balanced life. And it surprised me that it's taken the sort of COVID shock to kind of turn that into a world sensation. But I think if you look at stuff, you can look at stuff now like, I don't know, the recruitment industry, which is, let's face it, just terrible and completely unfit for the kind of purpose that it should have. At some point that will get sorted out. If you're objective and you look at it, it's bad, but it's going to potter on in its own way for a bit longer, and then it'll get sorted. And I think it was the same with retail. You knew that existing modes of retail, physical retail, weren't right, and I just think the thing I've learned to act on a bit quicker is when you get that inkling, when you know that convention is not there anymore, where something needs to change, you should get in there and get a closer look and try and get ahead.
So what role do you think brands play in society?
I don't know. What do you think? I think this one's interesting. It's an interesting question because I don't. I have a view, but it's not something that actually I think about a lot. Do you think other people do think about it a lot?
I actually think at the moment, with some of the big tech brands becoming, really quite influential, more valuable or profitable than whole sort of countries now. And they really are, becoming, quite powerful in the world. And I think the way they set their ethics, their sustainability stance, the way they talk to customers, I think is becoming, quite influential, more so than it ever has, and that's going to be interesting,
Yeah, I guess I guess my probably sort of naive take on it is that if I mean, do you remember that episode of Friends where Phoebe and Joey, you had a huge argument about there being no such thing as a selfless good deed, i.e. everything you did that was good had some level of self-interest in it. I kind of, I'm not totally cynical about it, but if it's down to the people that make your trainers or sell your deodorant to up your aspirations for the world, then that just feels like a bit of an indictment to me. If it's down to Patagonia and Ben and Jerry's to tell us how to behave, then what that really tells me is that our politics and our education have failed us. Because I mean I agree. I think those huge entities, as you say, the Googles and the Facebooks of this world, have outgrown sort of national boundaries and will, if not pinned, they're going to dominate things to a pretty unprecedented degree. But I think that and they won't all be bad, but actually, I would rather we had a better balance where we were taking some serious leadership from our politicians and from our educators that meant that the brands perhaps didn't have to fill in quite so many of those gaps.
Yeah, it's true. So how
my take on brands, I mean, I guess is, it's a badge, isn't it? I mean, in the end, it's a sort of quality standard and a satisfying thing. There's a reason I never eat McDonald's in this country, but always eat it when I go somewhere where I don't speak the language, which is, I recognise it and I know it's not going to make me ill.
Yeah. So how optimistic are you at the moment for the future? So what do you see yourself a year from now? Obviously there's been a lot of doom and gloom and things like that in the papers, but how optimistic are you for the future?
I think it's a really hard question, again, because some people, and I don't denigrate this. I mean, a lot of people find it very hard to cope with, as you say, a period like this, which is having, on an individual basis, is having some pretty profound effects. We've been relatively well shielded, so and I'm quite good at appreciating life as you live it. So not getting too up or too down about stuff along the way. So I don't think I hope that we have some new leadership in one or two big bits of the world that allows everyone to start working together to better degree, because that would be helpful. I'm really excited about getting my head into the cost of work and I hope that within a year there's some real fruits coming out of that. But this is. Aside from that, this is where, if I'm being really honest, the next list of priorities are to keep the kids going forwards and to get the kitchen extension done. I mean, it's that kind of, and it's not meant to be flippant. It's just that I don't think being, I think you want to keep on rolling, and if you don't pretend to be profound if you're not. And actually, I think we're lucky. We've got our sort of relative health and happiness, and so you want to hold on to that.
So, do you think the world needs some bold thinking?
Yes, certainly where where big and difficult things are going to have to be attempted and achieved. I would put it again. This is I don't know how helpful this is, but I think it needs. What I don't want to do is confuse boldness with intelligence and a sort of general lack of ego, because I think sometimes you hear about boldness, or you hear someone telling, what was it the other week, we're going to have a world leading system for this or so on. That's not bold thinking. That's bullshitting. And actually, so I hope that there's a sort of calm intelligence that descends with sort of more introverts and more women and more respect for intelligence, and fewer fat bullshitters in charge. And because actually that's probably what we need. I think you need good, bold, intelligent thinking, but frankly, what you really just need is good, intelligent people able to work together.
Yeah, no, I love that. Listen, thanks, Anthony, for chatting today. So thank you for listening to Bold Thinking, Entrepreneurial Stories Honestly Told. Join us next time to hear more from people making positive change in the world. Thanks, Anthony. It was really great to hear from you.